Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow participants, my name is Roland Banya and I work with the Southern African Trust. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this important virtual dialogue titled Empowering African Youth for the Fight Against Climate Change. This theme resonates deeply with the future of our continent and indeed the world. We are gathered here today not as individuals, but also as change agents, united by our shared resolve to address climate change, which is one of the world's most urgent issues of our time. In preparation for COP28, we aim to prioritize the inclusion of Africa's youth by listening to their voices, considering their ideals, hopes, and dreams, and acknowledging their collective presence in the broader global climate dialogue. In addition, given the urgency of this situation, as young Africans, we must unite, forge strong bonds of solidarity, and present a united front in this fight against climate change. Today, we have an amazing panel of young African leaders in the field of climate change who will be discussing some of these important and pertinent issues. However, before we get right into this discussion, let me introduce our esteemed moderator, Mr. Dion Shekuza. Dion brings into this conversation a wealth of knowledge and experience in climate action, particularly as it pertains to empowering youth on the continent. Dion is a distinguished advocate for climate change and a champion for the youth's role in this movement. We are very fortunate to have him moderate the discussion today. Welcome, Dion, and I hand over to you. It seems Dion has gone off the link. So I'll hand over to Alice and Farhana to give us a few brief opening remarks, and then we can get into the discussion. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Roland. And hello, Alice. Hello to everyone who's joined and is still joining. I see the numbers are creeping up. Thank you so much to SAYOF, to the Southern African Trust. They will introduce themselves. I'm going to just say a few brief words about the Climate Justice Donor Collaborative. I'm Farhana Yamin. I'm based in the UK. I'm originally from Pakistan, and I've been working on the front lines of climate justice in the climate negotiations, as well as in philanthropy for now over 33 years. As we all know, there is not enough funding going to climate justice, and it's not reaching the front lines to those who need it most. The climate change, the CJJT Donor Collaborative, we have come together to disrupt this reality. The stats, which we'll put up in a short while, are not good. They're getting better, but currently less than 2% of global philanthropy goes to climate mitigation, which is mainly greenhouse gas focused, with approximately 0.5% going to environmental initiatives in the global south. That's a report by One Earth. So 0.5%, a really tiny amount of that philanthropy, of the philanthropy that is directed to the climate. 95% of it is being directed to white and overwhelmingly male-led climate advocacy groups. And that's from a report by Solutions Project and by the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Justice. And within that, also, we know that those who are marginalized or those whose voices are not heard are not well served by this tiny amount of funding. For example, only 0.76% is going to youth climate movements. And that was a study done just last year by the Youth Climate Justice study. In terms of what we're doing, we've come together over the last 3 years to try and engage in a learning journey for philanthropy and from the field. We've had over 2,200 participants at a number of our webinars. This is one of them. And we've tried to make sure that everyone understands that that philanthropy needs to step up and that the field is doing brilliant work. Our CJ map, which we'll introduce you to, many of you have collaborated on it, is an attempt to make sure that all of those who want to fund those on the front lines and who are doing amazing work on climate justice and on just transition are readily identifiable. Over the last 3 years, we've also been a small grants maker ourselves. We've funded over 700,000 in small grants to 140 frontline leaders from over 30 countries in the global south, and many of them youth who came for the first time to their first COP in Glasgow at COP26 and last year at Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. We've also pioneered some amazing initiatives that came from and were a response to the field asking for spaces where different voices, forms of storytelling, where well-being and respite and creativity and imagination could really emerge. So we pioneered something called Culture COP, and we're doing something similar with amazing number of youth partners at this coming COP in Dubai. And I think it gives me a huge pleasure to also say that after this call, we'll be reconvening a number of youth regranters and those working in the youth space, as well as the regranting space, focusing on Africa in particular after this webinar. So just to let you know that this came from a retreat that we held in June, where we focused on youth organizations in particular. As you all know, I'm sure in this webinar, Africa has the largest number of, the largest population of global youth, and really is the future of climate ambition. I want to just thank all our partners. Alice is here and will say more about the Southern African Trust, but we've also partnered with the Green African Youth Organization, GAIO, with Adesso, with their platform Kuja Link, and with the Youth Climate Justice Fund. We are really looking forward to this webinar, which has been put together, thank you, by a hugely talented and wonderful set of partners who are going to take over from now on. We hope that you will join and learn more about the work that we've done so far over the 3 years. And those of you who are coming to Dubai for the next COP, please do get in touch. I think my colleagues will post more details in the chat about the events and convenings that we're going to be hosting in Sharm, you know, Freudian slip there, in Dubai. And I hope that you can also take a look at the climate justice map, which we've launched and hopefully we'll do trainings in. It's now available in 4 different languages: French, English, Spanish and Arabic. And we would love to get your feedback and for you to, you know, elaborate it and put more organizations there. I think there's already 1,600 organizations in there already, but it's an ongoing bit of work, and we really hope that you can join us. So I think I've covered most of the main things. We've going to have a very illuminating and very helpful webinar in the run-up to COP28. So over to you, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farhana, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I join my colleague Farhana in just, appreciating the time that you're making to connect with us, to engage on an important issue that for us at the Southern Africa Trust is quite important. So the Southern Africa Trust is a regional organization, non-profit, working in 16 countries in Southern Africa. And our work really focuses on ending poverty and inequality in the region. And as you can imagine, issues of climate change and natural resource governance are quite at the heart and center of what we do, given the fact that the region where we work, most of our economies are still largely agrarian, and so climate change and the impacts of climate change really speak to economic development and economic dynamics in the region. We also focus on issues of natural resource governance, again, because that is one of the key economic drivers in our region, a region that is quite well endowed with natural resources, but in most cases, not really managed very well. So this is an issue that we also really prioritize and cover. We also are worried and concerned about issues of gender justice. So we do have a portfolio of work that responds to that, being in a region that is very much patriarchal, and we see a lot of gender-based violence, and we're seeing a lot of the escalation of that challenge in the context also of climate change and bad natural resource governance. We also do have a portfolio of work around economic justice, again, as a key portfolio in terms of the issues of poverty and inequality in our region. So this particular webinar really sits in quite well if you think about these portfolios of work that I've highlighted. We've been in existence since 2005. And over the years, what we've realized is that all these portfolios of work actually intersect, and they do privilege, but at the same time also make it quite difficult for some populations to engage, to contribute, to influence decisions around development generally. So this is the reason why we partnered with our partners, the Southern Africa Youth Forum, with CJJT, and we really appreciate that partnership because it has allowed us the space and scope to create a platform that allows for young people to engage, to bring their urgency, to bring their voices, and to begin to plan around how they can use some of the spaces. Apart from the challenge of resources that Farhana highlighted in her remarks a few minutes ago, there are other issues there that really are barriers to youth engagement and youth participation in conversations, in discussions and debates, and in spaces that make decisions around finding solutions to some of these challenges that I've articulated, including the challenge of climate change. And I will just highlight two of those in addition to the resources. So just the idea of finding the space and the platform to engage, to come together, to exchange, to shape and to influence is it's like a rare commodity for most young people. We do know that in most cases in our region, space is very much something that is linked to age. So that challenge of ageism, where we see people of a certain age, people of a certain gender, and again, people of a certain color, having more space and opportunities to shape narrative, to shape opinions, to speak about issues, and in that process, make decisions about issues, for instance, of climate change, really important. And so this is just one way in which we are trying to create also space and enable young people to convene, to share, to exchange, and to plan on how they can begin to challenge and remove some of these barriers. And the second one, apart from the space, is also just the idea that when you think about decisions that are made, there is also, and it is actually linked to ageism, there is also an expectation and that, people of a certain age cannot necessarily contribute meaningfully to decisions that are as important as climate change. And that is, again, something that we challenge, especially here at the Southern Africa Trust, because we do believe that youth do have agency. So beyond the predominance of youth empowerment programs, we really try and push and encourage youth engagement, because youth do have ideas, they do have solutions, they sit with a lot of innovation and a lot of new thinking around some of these challenges that for a long time the region has been trying to respond to. So we are quite excited that we do have this afternoon a very vibrant and dynamic set of panelists, young people from the region, who are going to anchor the conversation, and we look forward to the contributions and also to your participation and contributions to the conversations this afternoon. So thank you so much for listening to us and for making time to actually connect and to engage with us and our partners. Back to you, Roland.
Thank you so much, Farhana and Alice, for those opening remarks and for setting the scene, really. Our moderator, Dion, had a bit of technical issues. I see he's back online. I hand over to you, Dion, Welcome.
Thank you so very much, Roland, and greetings to everybody. Do apologies, we have a really busy schedule here, and the place at which we are, the internet is quite under intense pressure. Obviously, to move forward, I'd like to say that we're very privileged to have such distinguished individuals who just introduced themselves, Arana and Alice, and I'm confident that their insights have contributed significantly towards our collective understanding of their task here, of our task here today. Now, as we embark on this conversation, it's definitely an honorable pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives to the forefront of our discussion, in particular, them being a specimen of the youth constituency and able to share with us their different perspective and trailblazers as well in their respective fields, contributing largely to the discourse on climate and youth empowerment. So based on that, I would like to not waste any further time and introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Shamiso Mucha, an ardent climate advocate and child's rights activist. She is the founder of Green Canopy EnviroCare, dedicated to promoting a green transition through sustainable restoration of the environment as the liaison for the official children and youth constituency to the UNFCCC Yango for 2023 on the local conferences of youth. Shamiso empowers and builds the capacity of youth to participate in climate action and decision-making processes. And then next we have our Southern African climate change youth envoy. I would like to highlight that the SADC region is the only one from what I know that actually has an official envoy on climate and youth. Laurel Kivuyo is a Tanzanian environmentalist and sustainability advocate. Laurel has a bachelor's degree in environmental health sciences. She's also the founder of Climate Hub Tanzania, and her impactful work includes building climate resilience, promoting inclusion of youth, women, and indigenous people in climate mitigation efforts. Laurel serves as the Youth Environment Ambassador in Tanzania as well. Then after, we have a very interesting individual from Botswana by the name Stephen Musarurwa, who is a passionate law student. As the president and founder of the AYCT, which I think is the Climate Time, an international coordinator for Climate Life. Stephen is at the forefront of climate advocacy. His commitment to sustainable development is evident through projects that address ecological breakdown. And Stephen has actively participated in global discussions, including SP 58, which is the subsidiary body for the UNFCCC, and also COP 27, which stands for Conference of Parties, and COI 17, which stands for Conference of Youth. And Stephen is one of the active African voices within that. Finally, it's a pleasure, and I'm delighted to welcome Shumirai Zizu, a Programs and Research Associate at the Southern Africa Trust. She has expertise in youth empowerment, climate justice, natural resource management, and Shumirai has contributed significantly to international development, a background in migration and climate-induced displacement, child rights governance, and sexual reproductive health rights also position her as a key player in these critical spaces in Southern and Eastern Africa. Together, this distinguished panel brings a wealth of experience and insights, as I said, being specimens from the youth constituency. And without further ado, I'd like to give them an opportunity to briefly just maybe give one sentence on who they are. And then thereafter, we would go right immediately into the questions for them to give us a little bit of their positions on the respective points. Thank you. So I would start with Shami. Hey, Shami, are you here? All right, perhaps Shamiso is not ready yet. I'd like to welcome Shumirai. If you can give us a brief introduction in one sentence, just briefly about yourself, and then we move on to the next colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dion, for the opportunity and for the beautiful introduction. As you have so succinctly and adequately put, I am Shmirai Zajo, and I work for the Southern Africa Trust under the great leadership of our CEO who opened, Alice Kanangoni. I am a law student and a lawyer by trade. I have an honors degree in law, and I also have a postgraduate degree in specified law, practical legal studies cum laude. And I really, really am passionate about climate change. And as the Programs and Research Associate, we take this pillar very seriously, and we understand the diverse intersections that are quite evident in the work we do as young African leaders. And I look forward to this discussion. Thank you, Dion.
Thank you very much, Shmirai. I see Shamiso is ready to also give us a few words of introduction, and then thereafter, Stefan and our envoy, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Apologies, everyone. I was just settling in just from another meeting there back to back. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I go by the name of Shemiso Mucha. I am from Zimbabwe. I'm a climate advocate. I'm also a founder of Green Canopy Envirocare, but more so on the global scale, I'm also the Yango, the official children and youth constituents of the UNFCCC. I'm the Elkoi liaison. So I'm liaising a total of 110 local conferences of youth around the world as well. And then I'm also one of the interim contact points for what is called the Child Rights Working Group in Yango, to try and ensure that children are also mainstreamed when it comes to climate change and decision-making processes. Thank you very much. Handing it over to you, Dion.
Thank you for that brief and direct introduction. Might we hear a few words from Stephen, then Laura.
Hi guys, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Does this sound okay? Okay, thank you so much, Dion, for that introduction. My name is Stephen Sarura. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm no longer a student of law. Now I'm a climate advocate. I graduated in LLB law. I'm very passionate about climate change, and currently I'm the international coordinator for Climate Live and also international coordinator for Fridays for Future. So I'm involved in so many organizations around the world, that includes organizations in Germany, in Europe, in other European countries that have to do with climate justice, like KBV, German organization that deals with injustices in Africa. I think Dion, you literally said almost everything about me, but I'm so glad that I'm here with you guys. Thanks to you, Shumi, for inviting me to this. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much. Laurel, would you mind giving us a few words of introduction?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Laurel. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm Laurel Kivuyo from Tanzania. The Southern African Climate Change Youth Envoy, and currently I'm collaborating in the climate justice map with Farhana and a very prominent organization, Climate Justice Just Transition. And we're so happy to share good news that so many organizations from our region, SADC, are now mapped in the climate justice map. But also nationally, I serve as the founder and director of the Climate Hub Tanzania, an organization that is completely youth-led, that is working towards building climate resilience here in my country, Tanzania. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Laurel. We are honored to have all of you here. And now it's an opportunity for us to dive right into our discussion. And I'm quite intrigued to perhaps break down the floor by starting with Shamiso and getting a bit of reflections on, for example, talking about how you are a liaison for the Conference of Youth and the constituency of Yango. You are involved with building coalitions and connecting different youth groups. And as such, I would like to know, what are your thoughts on building youth coalitions among African young people to address climate change collectively? For example, are you able to share any successful example or strategy in relation to that question? Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. So I think selfishly, I'll be here the whole time talking about local conferences of youth, talking about ARCOIs, talking about Yango, and I think we have this challenge where it's me who's used to all these abbreviations, right? And what am I saying when I'm saying Elkoi Yango, right? So I'll start off with Yango. So it's the official children and youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and it houses over 10,000 individuals around the world. And it also has a lot of organizations that are working within Yango itself. So that's one. And then I talked about Elkoi. So you hear me say Elkoi a lot, and Elkoi is Local Conference of Youth. And these are events under the banner of Yango, and they contribute to the UNFCCC. So how this works is that it starts off from the local level, where young people are hosting these local conferences of youth, and they are approved by Yango. And then what we demand, and one of the key requirements from the local conferences of youth, rather, what we can say is the output from local conferences of youth is what is called a youth statement. So that youth statement then feeds into the regional level, and the regional level is where we have the regional conference of youth. So this is where young people form a regional conference of youth, where young people gather from different parts of the continent, right? Maybe say for Africa, and then they want to come together to form a position as African people, be it on loss and damage, on climate finance. Young people come together and they form positions on that. And then the deliverables to that are handed over to the global process now that is called the Global Youth Statement. So this is a document that is demands that are collected from different areas of the world. So it's not a Yango document. I'd like to clarify that. It's a youth document, because even when young people host a local conference of youth, it's not for Yango members. It's for any young person. And I also want to stress this out to also say that this involves children as well, as it is the children and youth. So these are local conferences of children and youth. And in building coalitions, what you want to ensure is that you want to make sure it's a coalition of the willing, right? You don't want to drag someone into a process where they don't know what it is that is going on. So what Yango makes it easy in a sense that in trying to identify and to map people that are doing the similar things that you're doing, right? People that are following maybe key thematic areas that you're following, it makes it easier for you to come together and then come up with a strategy. Maybe it's a resource mobilization strategy. And even before that, I think one of the key things is forming a trust in these coalitions, because in as much as you can work, there needs to be a relationship that builds off all these relationships when it comes to whatever form of activism, that you want to push forward. So I think the most important thing is trying to identify people that are doing the same thing as you, and also building a coalition of the willing, and then you map your strategy and how you want to work in terms of the things that you'd like to do. Yeah, I would put a pin in it on here for now.
Well, thank you very much for those insightful views, Shamiso. I think you touched on very critical points, and I'd like to highlight on trust. I think trust is something that most of us are not very well trained on, especially when you're coming to deal with different dynamics and different people. When you're in an academic setting, it's quite easier to pursue particular themes and topics, but when you come around other people, you kind of have to become more tolerant, and you have to respect other people's views, because climate change impacts everybody different, and therefore I think it's important we share that for us. Now, I think we'll come back with some reflections on your comments, Shamiso, but I think the next speaker I'd like to touch on is Laurel. Drawing from your experience as a Tanzanian environmentalist and youth leader, do you believe that young voices from Africa are adequately represented in decision-making processes related to climate change? And how can we work towards improving this representation formally on regional and international platforms, given the fact that you're having an envoy position? And Shamiso shared more perspective of how youth mobilize and build coalitions from the grassroots. Then from your perspective, do you then believe that young voices from Africa are adequately represented in decision-making processes related to climate change? And how can we work towards improving this representation? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dion. In my perspective, young voices are now heard. If you compare with the past years, I can say right now, everybody is conscious about climate change, and everybody is conscious about youth and climate action. And right now, so much emphasis and so much support is given to young people to enable them to actually participate in decision-making processes. And that is why we have so many platforms, and in those platforms, you will find young voices. And coming back to my country, I could measure, I could say right now we're halfway there probably. And speaking regionally, I could say we are also getting there, because we have so many young people that are not just activists, but most of them are also very well educated. We have lawyers that are young people. We have just like myself, I am an environmentalist and health environmentalist by profession. So we have so many disciplines and professions from young people that could actually take them to those tables where decisions are made, and at least their voices are equally taken into consideration. But the other thing is that we have a climate negotiator program in our organization SAYOF, and I could say having platforms like those where we could equip young people to actually know what they are actually going to do in those tables is very important, because as much as we want our young voices to be on the tables, we need to like capacitate them, and we need to support them so that they could have the adequate knowledge, data, and confidence actually. And I could say one of our program, the climate negotiator program that we did in Tanzania, we impacted over 20 young people, and having such platforms, teaching young people, capacitating them and helping them so they could be able to actually represent themselves is very important. So I could say we are getting there. It's not very bad compared to other years, but we still need more investment in supporting these young people to actually make sure their voices are truly and equally heard. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Laurel. I believe that you've answered the question concretely. You gave us some examples of the Climate Youth Negotiator program, and you spoke about capacitating young people in order for them to be functional within the decision-making processes. I really would like to stay on your point, but we'll probably then delve back to this perspective later. And basically my next, I'm very interested to actually understand, now that we've spoken about coalitions and decision-making, I'd like to move on to Stefan next. And Stefan, I'd like to hear from you as basically a law student, somebody who's focused on initiatives on the ground, working with several initiatives in and outside Africa, and someone actively looking into bridging the gap and looking at the interdisciplinary perspective. Could you shed light on the key funding gaps that currently exist for youth platforms in Africa that are focused on climate action? And additionally, maybe you can also tell us how we can ensure that funding is directed towards youth platforms effectively to support climate initiatives.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dion, and all the other panelists that have come for me. Like you mentioned earlier on, and I think Alice and Farhan say something about the situation in Africa. So, you know, the basic thing that you're facing right now is that we have youth, we have capacities, but these people don't have access. They have limited access. So now it is hard for them to receive information, to receive sources for funding, especially like, you have people from the grassroots rural areas. These people are not connected. These people are not here. For me to be here, I'm connected. But we have someone who is not even here, someone who is in the rural area. That person is not connected. So even if I have a talent, even if I'm a good climate advocate, even if I lack visibility, you don't even know me. And these people now, they lack information in regards to climate funding, in regards to all the information that is necessary for them to survive in regards to funding. So you find out that nowadays, Dion, I've been also in Kenya, I've discovered that there are people who don't even understand about climate change, and also there are people who have solutions to these issues. But they don't have access to information. They don't have access to anyone helping them out. So you literally asked me on how can we help these youth now. We need to do more of capacity buildings. We need to connect with them. We need people who work on the ground. Most of the people are just international climate activists, just act out there, but they are not there on the ground with the people. They are not helping the people on the ground. They are not bringing something to the table. So you end up finding out that there are very few people who are just connected. There are very few people who build the international spaces. We have a lot of people down there. So we need more of capacity building, capacitating the people on the ground, giving them more information about about what is happening, and also we have networking issues, so how can we ensure that funding flows nicely? We need to network them. We need to, it's just one of the same point where, like I'm saying, we need to connect them. These people are not connected. What can we do as climate activists who have been connected? We need to connect these people on the ground. And also that the issue is that we need to do collaborative measures, with those people, understanding them, and also it also goes back to the point of capacitating these people with information and knowledge that they need for them to survive in regards to funding. As much as I know that funding in Africa is something that is scarce, and this is what I'm fighting for when I go to the global north, that you need to, when you talk of climate justice, we're talking of you giving us what it takes. We cannot adapt to climate change. We cannot adapt to these problems because already we are incapacitated. We don't have what it takes for us to survive. You cannot tell someone in Somalia that you need to adapt. How do they adapt? You cannot tell someone that is in Maputo that have been affected by Cyclone Freddy and Cyclone Idai that you need to adapt. How are they going to adapt? You need to network them. You need to educate them. You need to capacitate them with the right information that they need. So as much as we talk of funding, Dion, it's very critical point that we need to explore, especially as a leading climate activist in Southern Africa. As much as I know, Southern Africa is one of the most affected regions in the whole world, Dion. When we talk of all these problems that are happening in Africa, in Southern Africa, but we don't even have funding. Some of us don't even have funding to go to COP, of which you wanted to go and talk about our problems. So it's something that is a major issue that we need to discuss about it. We need to find collaborative measures. We need to find ways of networking with the local people. We need to connect with these people. We need to give them what it takes for them to survive, what it takes for their voices to be heard. That's all I can say for now, Dion. I really talk too much. I can spend the whole hour, but thank you so much, Dion, on that, and I really do appreciate
Hello, is Stefan still live?
Yes, I'm still live, Dion.
All right. Thank you very much, Stefan. I had lost you immediately when you were concluding, and therefore I thought you were cut off. And you raised some really, really critical points, like localizing the climate agenda so that it can be specific to the context and realities of the African child. And you spoke largely about something I like is like making the circle bigger through capacitating different people. And I think this brings us to Shamiso's point that spoke about being thematic and specific so that it's easier for you to participate and not like find yourself all over the place and then give your energy to so many things. Now, I think ideally the discussion will continue for long, but it's good to give everybody an opportunity to speak and then we can break it up a bit. So thank you once again, Stefan, for sharing your insights on funding challenges and opportunities. And therefore, now I'd like to go to the last speaker, Shumirai. Now, Shumirai, given your experience in the legal and international development sector, how can we actively engage young people in planning and decision-making processes related to climate change mitigation in Africa? What strategies can we employ to ensure that diverse perspectives and experiences of young people are well represented in this decision-making? And maybe you can also help us understand one point raised by Stephen. It's about information accessibility. And he said most of these people who are impacted by climate have a right to this information, but somehow they don't have access to it. Can you tell us from a human rights perspective as well how we can work around that so that the early warning type of information that people need gets to them on time? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dion, for the platform and the opportunity to speak, and thank you for the questions. I think when we discuss the issue of implementing strategies for youth involvement, we really have to start at the core of the issue, which is the grassroots issue that youth at the grassroots level, most African youth, as the trust, obviously, we work in the SADC region, but in the Africa region as a whole, there is a lack of even just basic education itself. And so now we also have a situation where we have youth who are not even getting the basics of education, not even being exposed to a math classroom or an English classroom. How are they now supposed to know about emissions and the Paris Agreement? And I think as Africans, especially as Africans and young African leaders, we need to realize that we also speak from a point of privilege. Because for us to be on these platforms, it was not easy. I'm sure if all of us told our stories of how we got here, it was very hard. So the information we harness and we have, it's very, very important. And I believe that it starts in the home. It starts in your home as a young leader who's had the opportunity to go to law school, who's a climate change activist, to educate your community yourself. Education tends to be thought of as an institution or going to a varsity. No, it's about having those conversations with your parents on the dinner table, having those conversations with your friends. You know, we can't just all be on, Instagram posting selfies. It's about posting things that are meaningful and sharing things that we know that our friends may not be aware of. I mean, we have colleagues who are accountants or doctors who can't even tell you about COP, who don't know what COP is, who don't even know, sadly, what SADC is. So that brings in the issue of when do we now, as Africans and as young people, how do we now take that level of education and practically implement it? I think the first thing as a young African is that I think we are always labeled as young, we don't know what we're doing, we're very disorganized. Now, I was speaking to a gentleman in the SADC Youth Parliament where I serve as a mentor, and I was telling him that, all of these gaps, we are the ones who can lead in them. So it's also us actively within these networks, within these dialogue spaces, within these, when we're in Kenya for the Africa Climate Summit, is for us to also take the lead on that. We cannot keep saying our presidents and those who have executive powers are the ones who should now be the ones implementing. If there's a gap, let us be the ones to be the ones who actively engage and fill that gap, which is very, very critical. And I think also working through organizations. I think it was earlier mentioned by Laurel and Farhana that there was a mapping done. We're so unaware of the very diverse amount of organizations, youth organizations that exist. So it's also about implementing strategies where we're able to connect, such as building that map, building connections, building relations, because it's time for Africa and young Africans to put the power in their own hands. And I don't even think it's that we don't have the power, but I think it's that we've also become complacent as Africans, where we tend to want to say, oh, the government, okay, that's fine. But we have all the resources, we have the skills. We know that there are brilliant young African students sitting at home because they don't have access, to these sorts of things. But how do we articulate that brilliance? And I think another point is how do we now access and integrate that brilliance and get those youth involved. Now, remember, most Africans don't have an honors degree level of education. So it's also about promoting education, of course. Government should be enforced to do what they have to do as they're instructed and mandated to do, and they're sworn into parliament to do. But it's also promoting how do we use Africans who may not have the formal education, who may not have the formal experience. How do we integrate that? Because that is our reality. We are not in the global north. Our reality is that we really are in a situation where we need to not start harnessing raw skills, and we ourselves using those raw skills. I can tell you, I can take a child from a rural area in Kwamashu in Durban, and I can bring them here and they can speak better than all of us here with masters and 50 years experience. So there's that raw talent. How do we harness it? It also has to do with, we can go on, I can go on to the, the topic of the decolonization of the educational system in Africa. So it's also about promoting and just engaging around these issues. But I think the most important thing is getting that basic information out to people, because from my experience, and I have to be blunt and brutally honest, when I went to COP last year, even the young people who were at COP, who had the ability to go to COP, some of them, you'd start saying, the Kyoto, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this? And you'd realize they had no understanding, but they had that privilege. So it's also about also actively enhancing ourselves to take charge, take that course, read that book, read that article. I think that's how we can really rally together. But we have such a beautiful way. And I think one of our greatest and biggest weapons as youth is we can convene. And when we've seen what happened in Zambia, when the youth convened, what happened? So we have to use our convening power. And yes, media can be a tool for foul play and terrible things, can be associated with social media. But that's also a power we have. I can speak to you, Dion. You can be in Washington, D.C., and we can be speaking and engaging and activating these programs internationally. We also have a large and a variety of youth diaspora that we are dealing with. So we are African youth who are scattered across the globe. It's just about us coming together. And I think for purposes of time, Dion, those would be the issues I think we need to concentrate on for now, before we can get to, okay, when are we going to allow young people to become presidents? We need to solidify and deal with the root issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shumirai. I basically have to say, before I reflect on your points, because there's so much to reflect to, so much so that there's a fellow panelist that would like to support your comments on that, and I'd like to give them the opportunity, because I think you touched on some points that made, in particular, Stephen want to share some thoughts with us. Maybe, Stephen, you can take the floor immediately.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dion. Shumirai, you literally nailed it on point. What I realize is that we are our own enemies, Africans. I would ask a very simple question to you, Shumirai, or anyone. What if all the fossil fuel companies shut down today? What is going to happen to Africa? If you would answer me on that. What is going to happen to Africa? Should we give an answer on that?
I don't mind answering, but maybe for purposes of
I just want to exactly. So the reason why I'm asking the question is because I've met several activists in Europe. They are advocating for ending of fossil fuels in Southern Africa. Already people are poor, guys. Those people that we say that we want to connect, how do we connect them when they don't have access to electricity? Right now we have a very huge population of people who are not even connected. So what I'm trying to support is that, like what you're saying, Shumi, that we can connect, we can make a huge impact together as activists. I think Dion also tried to make a group for Southern African youth leaders where we can also talk together, we can share our ideas, share our thoughts. This is the moment where we now use the knowledge we get, use the knowledge, even when you get now, some of the people are not going to share with the people who are not even connected. So the information is circulating with the people who are already connected. So it's hard now for those people who are not at the connected, but those people who are at the front line of the ecological breakdown being affected each and every day. So we need to be very, very, very careful of what we say, because what we say might even suppress our brothers and sisters who are down there who don't even have access to resources already. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much, Dion and Shimi.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for those reflections. I think ideally they touch on Shumi's point, where she spoke about localization and ownership. I think we as young people should learn to interpret these global scientific outcomes from a local perspective, meaning what does 1.5 degrees Celsius mean for our region? The IPCC reports are showing how Southern Africa would be experiencing slightly different hotter and drier climates, while others would be getting wetter and such. So it's important, I guess, for us to also respect every individual if they're not like judge them based on their positioning before we share such information. I'd like to hear more on these points, but I think because our time is quite tight, I'd like for us to jump immediately to the next question, and this one goes to Shamiso. And this is a question of a very specific group that I feel we have slightly been leaving behind. And I think if these activism and advocacy and empowerment started with us at that stage, it would be easier. So, Shamiso, considering your involvement with Yango's Child Rights Working Group, how can we ensure that the unique perspectives or promote the unique perspective, the needs of young people, including in particular now children, are taken into account in climate-related decision-making processes? and empowerment capacity building initiatives. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dion. I think this is quite, while also a sensitive topic around children, it's also such a huge thing that we need to start talking about. And I think it's one thing that we need to bring into consideration, that it's so much safeguarding issues that need to be brought into the discussion anytime we're talking about children, whether it's online engagements, whether it's physical engagement. It's a lot of things that need to be put in place. But one thing that we've managed to do so far is the Child's Rights Working Group with Yango, is that, as I said before, there's what we call the GYS. So that is the Global Youth Statement. And one of those decisions, one of the key parts of the GYS is that we have key demands for children demands, right? Specifically relating to children, that's one. And then the second thing that we've been doing is that we've been having so many meetings with UNICEF and SIRI and Save the Children. And what we've been doing specifically is trying to make sure that, because it's the children and youth constituency, right? Children were being involved this whole time, but then it's now to a point where we need to do this at a larger scale, right? And what we've been doing is we're drafting what is called the child safeguarding policy, right? So this policy would regulate how anyone engages with these children, right? Anyone who wants to join Yango, which I can also share a link in the chat, because here today, I think my biggest duty that I'm bearing today is to make these processes as simplified as possible. We're so much surrounded with many technical processes where it comes to a point where I can't come here and start also introducing so many technical things. So for example, I would share with you like a link to join Yango. And then one of the next key steps there, once you join Yango, is that you need to do an online training on how to engage with children. So this is no longer just about me. What we're saying is that every single person has that duty and that mandate to make sure that any child that is around you, you know how to engage with them, you know how to take care of them, and you know if anything happens to them, you know how to report. So this is how we want them to also be activists, but also be activists in a safe space. And that is essentially what we're trying to do, to make sure that when they come into this space, they're safe, and then they're consented, and every single thing that they do, we track those activities. So I think that is one of the key things that is coming out this year, and this would be established right before COP28. So I think it's a huge thing for children's. This is a win in the children's camp, and we hope to continue pushing this up until the coming year. So this would be minors engagements as well. Anyone below the ages of 18 going down, even 0, even babies. I was saying I'm also part of the selections team, and last year there was a baby was accredited to get to COP28. So this is what we're talking about, that this spaces also have to be inclusive. I also had the opportunity to be part of the programs team last year for the Children and Youth Pavilion. And you can see that compared to previous COPs, right, COP is opening up. Now we have a whole Children and Youth Pavilion for the second time in 2028. And I think those are the key things that we need to maximize upon and make sure that we apply to have events in those spaces and that our voices are heard and they're loud. And we speak in their language and we don't speak for them. I always try to push for that, to say, let them say what they want to say. We do not change it. We leave it as it is. So yeah, I would put a pin in it on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those insightful contributions, Shami. So there's really nothing much to take away but to honor the idea of children being safely guarded so that our children do not have to stay out of school to fight for a sustainable future. And also the unique perspective and circumstances of the African child are often not accounted for when we are talking about empowering children. And most of them, some of them could be farm workers' children who've never gone to school. I mean, simply going to Malawi, even Niger, countries that I visited earlier. And just driving from the airport, you can see these little children on the side of the road. Some of them are selling mouses, others are selling like eggs. And one wonders if they see how the impact of climate are going to make that more difficult for their parents to sustain. So thank you for those perspectives, Shamiso. And I think this leads us to our
Dion, I think you're muted. You're muted on your end.
Oh, man. Totally sorry about that. I think I'm not too sure where I was, but I was thanking Shamiso for the perspective on the children. And I wanted to move on to the next speaker, which is Laurel. And my logic here is like to hear from you, given your experience in environmental conservation and building climate resilience, how do you see the role of indigenous people and local communities in shaping sustainable and local climate initiatives in particular? How can their knowledge be integrated into the broader climate strategies in Africa, looking at even the young people within the indigenous setting and how they can be empowered as well? So maybe you can give us a Hello, Laurel, did you get my question?
Yes, I got your question. Thank you so much. So I think there is so much potential in indigenous communities, and luckily I am also coming from and store. These indigenous communities have so much in store, and there are so many things that I could say. We were hosting an event the last few weeks, and you know, one of the things that we really encouraged is like focusing on also the indigenous knowledges, because you know, in the past few years, I could say in the generations of our grandfathers, let's say, I mean, our grandfathers could really know how to predict weather and climate change just by using simple indigenous tips. So their knowledge is actually very important, the traditional knowledge. And give them positions without letting other people speak for them. Why not giving them positions and they also speak for themselves? Yeah.
Laurel, I take it. All right. I'm assuming that Laurel is done. Thank you very much for those reflections, Laurel, especially touching on indigenous knowledge systems and how they can be better accommodated, especially when you're talking about community-based adaptation. This leads me to the next question that I would like to ask Shumirai. With your expertise in international development, including youth empowerment and climate justice, capital letter justice, how do you think we can bridge the gap then between the policy discussions that we have at the international level, like the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocols, and such, and then grassroots initiatives led by young people in local communities? Like what strategies can be employed to then like ensure the effective collaboration and impact between the top and the bottom? If you can just give us some reflections, thanks.
Thank you so much, Diane, for the question. I would like to actually present something that I've been working on a paper. So I was actually researching for the paper, and what this particular method is called the Roger Hart's ladder of participation. And what it does is it measures in terms of how to measure where you are in terms of you know, the coordination of youth and the participation of youth. So if you don't mind, I'd love to share the 8 steps that are indicators, with one obviously being that you are at a very low stage of participation within our organizations, within our communities, within our various spaces, and then 8 obviously being the best. Now, what this ladder calls itself rungs that go up a ladder. And so rung 1 is about manipulation. So if you're in a community or you're in a space where you have adult-led youth activities, and then youth are just supposed to come, listen to an adult and leave, you're really at the bottom. Then we have what we call decoration, which is that you have these youth events, and I think we've been seeing it a lot within our policy-making spaces and with our leaders as well, where when it's Youth Day, you suddenly see these youth committees pop up from nowhere, and we get shocked. We're like, we didn't know there was a youth community. And then for us in the Africa region, what's worse is that if you look at those youth communities, those people are no younger than 40 years old. So if you're at rung 2, it's quite bad. And then once you get to rung 3, we have what we call tokenism, which is that you're used as a token. So it's just to say, for example, it's taking Stephen and putting him in a room. Me, if I was an executive in an organization and Stephen was the only youth in my organization, I would take Stephen, I would just put him there to say, as a token of, we are actually really passionate about youth, but really we don't do anything with youth, And Stephen himself, as an African, even though he wants to make impact within his organization, he can't, because there's that issue of, okay, I want to be a youth activist, but now I'm being used as a token and being put in an organization, but I need the money. So I have to continue being this token. Then we have what we call rung 4, which is assigned but not informed. So being given these great titles, like Shimirai is the climate ambassador for Zimbabwe and the SADC region, but then I know nothing. I'm just sort of used as a puppet, and I'm just taken around. And then we have what we call rung 6, which is adult-initiated shared decisions with youth, which means that when now they're saying, okay, it's time for the youth to give insights, then you'll have our policymakers, our people in government, our key regional bodies, our RECs, now saying, oh, yes, we like the idea, but just add this. And at the end of the day, you have a document that was more reflective of an adult's opinion than a youth's opinion. Then we have what we call rung 7, which is in youth initiated and directed, which means now you're giving youth the platforms, you're giving them the funding to direct and be in these spaces and to be able to actively perform on their own, no adult supervision, and that is an ideal area. Now, if you get to rung 8, which is youth initiated shared decisions with adults. This basically means that if we're sitting at a boardroom table, we cut the boardroom in half. We have 50% youth, 50% youth that are, on the other side. And I think it's important to bring in, maybe for those on the call who don't know where you rank in the youth age categorization. If you look at the African Youth Charter, a youth is considered someone between 15 and 35. So when we say we're dividing the root in 2, it's not like we're putting 18-year-olds on one end and 50-year-olds on the other. It's a diverse group of youth and a diverse group of leaders who are obviously over the age of 35, and that creates that space. But I think what's really important is that I think also when I practiced law, I got very frustrated because there's also an issue with bringing youth into these policy-making spaces, but there's a very, very critical issue that we have policies. And I usually when I go to these events, we want to talk about what policy can we make? What policy? We have too many policies. We have too many laws. They're there. It's about implementation and being able to actually hold government to account. We have the African Youth Charter. We have the declaration by SADC on youth and youth empowerment, which have beautiful words and speak to all the sentiments we find ourselves being forced to speak to in these platforms, but they're not implemented. So we really need to get to a space where I think it connects to the first question you asked me about actually getting together and enlightening each other about what is in place, because I have no power without information. And I cannot go to a president also and just be like, hi, Mr. Ramaphosa, it doesn't work like that. There's formal protocol. So it's also about educating youth on what the protocols are when you're going into a youth space. Some youth don't even know that, ideas are gazetted, laws are gazetted. You have opportunities to comment on these things, but there's a lack of information and knowledge around that. And I think there needs to be that interlinkage, which brings again that aspect of education. But then those of us who are in these spaces with these leaders who have that privilege, I think it's very important to understand that we have to, unfortunately, as Africans and African youth and being part of the global South, we face the reality that we are not always viewed as the most knowledgeable. So we have to be very aware that we are critically aware of how do we go and present something in the parliament if you're provided that opportunity. What are the protocols? How do you address a minister? What is the appropriate dress code? We really need to work on those things, and then we can get to a place where once we've worked on the core issues, we know the policies, we know the protocols, we have the organizations, we have the build. When those opportunities come, we go there, we strike, and they can see that, wow, this is something that, you know, is quite practical, but it's a very complex issue. And I think this also explains why, and I don't want to say this, but I have to say it. Yes, there's a lot of money that is due to Africa that is not coming from the global north. It's not coming down to the grassroots level, but it does eventually come down. But then where does it go? It gets stuck in the coffers. So there's also that issue of, you know, what can we as youth, how do we now create an agenda where we advocate for the release of that money, because the money eventually comes. Yes, it takes a while, and that's a very concerning issue, but the money is there. But where it goes, we don't know, and no one knows the accurate platforms and spaces to go and say, but where did the money for that school that was supposed to be built from, the money from the UK? What? No one does that interrogation, and I think it's time to really build that voice in that agency. I hope that answers your question, Dion.
Thank you so very much. I'm always taken by your comments because you introduced us to quite a lot, especially the 8-point system. And I like the last one that speak about youth and adults convening in order to make a decision collectively. If there's something I took from you, is that we are looking for a common denominator, some type of interlocutor that links the leaders, the youth, and then how the combination of both can serve then the community. And also took note of something you said, that the means of implementation is something we don't often ask. So meaning we would concentrate on the policy and what good this policy may be able to do for us. And then we would be excited about the idea that such a policy exists. And when it comes from the international level, at a local level, our initiatives are somewhat not related because there's a lack of means of implementation that helps in, like, access to finances, technology, capacity building and training. And I think this is a very important conversation because the youth are stuck in that one bubble, which is not allowing us access to the other bubbles where the leaders are making decisions and where means of implementation are discussed, like climate change technology networks. So I like how that conversation comes to the bottom. I think that's where we could change the fortune of African youth climate activism when we figure that out. So thank you very, very much. To all our listeners out there, thank you once again also for being with us this entire time. We know you could be doing other million things, and we are very grateful. And I'd like to get to our last round of questions because we have one speaker that has to unfortunately leave us, and that's Laurel. So Laurel, before you leave, I can just get a straightforward answer from you. In short, how do you believe we can collectively support a unified African youth voice to ensure it's heard and influential at COP28? And also, as we approach this COP, what do you think should be the top priorities for African youth in the fight against climate change? In short, so thank you.
Good friend. So I think with supporting African young people, we really need to like calm down and listen to what do they really want. You see, so there is a bunch of agendas that we are taking to the COP, and one of the things that we are really putting forward is finances and resources for African young people. We have so much in store. We have so much innovations and so much climate led solutions, and they are done by young people. So we are really keen on exploring resources to support these young people scaling up their innovations. But the other very important thing is capacity building. As much as we will need the resources, we need to capacitate our young people so they could even know how to receive the grants and how to even apply and how to utilize to audit in scaling their climate-led solutions. And as you can see, as we're heading to COP, still the number for attendance that I know until right now, probably as the envoy from SADC who are attending is still not very nice, though it's much better to compared to last year. But you know, we have so many young people and most of them are in this webinar. They have their accreditations and they lack funding to attend the and she is one of amazing people who are really pushing the flow of funding, shifting of resources to the global south. And you know, with equipping young people from Africa with all of these resources and capacity building, but also giving them access to the platforms, it's really a help and a way forward to all of us. So I think those are like my biggest remarks, and I'm so thankful to be part of this webinar, and I hope to like read out and connect with so many others. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Laurel. We appreciate your perspective, and I think we would be giving you an opportunity to attend to other affairs. And we took note of your comments on finances and resources, capacity building, and in particular, lack of funding to COP28, which is a big, big problem for us. So I think now to help you buttress your point, Shamiso, can you slightly just help us understand a little bit, pick up from where Laurel was speaking in terms of top priorities for African youth? Can you, from your perspective, can you tell us what are the most critical steps that you think African youth should take to combat climate change effectively, but also in organizing ourselves towards when we go to events like COP28? And if you wish, at this point, I would also like to hear from you some youth-led climate initiatives or movements that have particularly inspired you, because you spoke a lot about Yango. I think we would also be interested to know what other youth networks or movements are similarly advancing the youth agenda. Thank you. Is Shamiso here? Do I take it that Shamiso is not on the call? Can someone confirm?
It seems that she's dropped off, Dion.
Oh, thank you. I was on mute. So since we have lost Shamiso, maybe we could move on to Shumirai and Stephen. We basically have one last round of interrogative questions or collaborative questions, if I may say. So basically, I think to give the opportunity to Stephen first so that we can close out the Shumirai. Stephen, can you tell us how we can ensure that, or rather, how do you like see the most significant challenges and opportunities for youth-led platforms across the continent? This, you can maybe use your experience having been at the Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Youth Climate Assembly and share with us from what you saw that you believe could be some significant challenges and also opportunities for youth-led platforms working on climate across the continent as we prepare ourselves towards COP28 to cut away with the funding and accreditation just to be organized as well, apart from action.
Well, your network is lagging, Dion, so maybe I didn't get some of the things that you said. But just to answer on what I had, I think the first thing that we need to understand is that we are the ones who are supposed to serve ourselves. Nobody's coming to serve us. So as much as we want to close the gap, we need to open the spaces for each other. We need to give each other opportunities. We need to make sure that whenever an opportunity rises, we share those opportunities with each other. As much as you asked me about my experience, also for me to be here because someone opened the opportunity for me. So we can do it also. Everybody can do it. As much as you are talking of funding for COP, I literally understand that there are so many African activists, there are so many potential activists, the ones that we're talking about, the ones from grassroots, they really want to attend COP, but the problem is that they don't have funding to go to COP. So what is it that we can do to make sure that we get support? We need to also collaborate. Collaboration is one of the most important things. We also need to make sure that we, can you hear me? Oh, shit. You can hear me, right? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So as I was mentioning that, Dion, it is so hard for us as Africans to sustain ourselves, as much as Shumi said something about recognition in the UNFCCC and UNGO, yes, we are recognized, but we are incapacitated. We don't have what it takes for us to be there. So we might be recognized by UN that they are youth, but when you don't have capacity, when you don't have funding, when you don't have resources to share our stories, to share our struggles, it is so hard. So I think at the moment, Dion, what is important is for us to join hands, and we need to know that there's nothing for us without us. So the whole point is that we need to join hands, work together, have collaborative power. As me, you see me now, you all know me because someone connected me to be here, someone helped me to be here. So you can also do it. Everybody can do it. That's all I can say in regards to that, Dion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Very straightforward. And I think you reiterated some very important points that you've been reminding us throughout the course of the day. And this then leads us to our final speaker for this particular juncture. And this is Shumirai. Can you tell us now, in short, which methods or channels do you suggest for reaching and engaging a diverse group of African youth in climate action within our communities? This I also ask because you mentioned the diversity of the youth constituency, and you also reminded us that youth are not a monolith, right? That you've got those with school and those without school. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about that divide of rural urban youth and how we can engage the diversity that comes with the African youth engaged community, which is not always the same for other continents. And also, if you may, like you spoke about talented young people that are also out there that have the skills. And so what strategies can we employ to ensure that the diverse perspective and experiences of those young people who have these I think sometimes frugal innovation and activating that genius you're talking about are well represented in decision making. So in short is how do we make use of the diversity when we engage African youth? And then two, how can we ensure that the diverse genius, ingenuity and perspective and experiences of young people will counted into the decision making process? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dion, for the question, for the final question. I think when it comes, I'll just answer your second question first. I think what we're seeing in the youth space, especially as a trust, we are a re-granting organization within SADC, and we do work with various youth partners, and we've re-granted over $22 million in quite not a very, I would say, significant amount of time, which we are very proud of as the trust. But being able to engage with intermediaries is very important. And also being able to be, if you can be that bridge in terms of being able to be the intermediary that connects the policymakers to those on the grassroots, that's how you can also collect a diverse group. Not everyone is the UN, not everyone is the African Union. But if you connect all of those organizations together and we work collaboratively to obviously bridge the gap between that organization, whether it's my colleague who works in a rural township, and she knows somebody who's dealing with a GBV case, and they need funding, but they can't necessarily take on the funding risk themselves, and then they do it through the trust. That's one of the ways you can access it if we're talking about the practicalities of it all. But another simple way is, like I've mentioned before, through technology, through webinars, and also just in ensuring that we're not relying on anyone but ourselves in the communities to do that. And when it comes to engaging the talented young youth, what we are seeing is that one of our youth partners, a brilliant young man, he just released a book recently, and he actually is he's now leading on a campaign where we now create jobs for Africans by Africans that understand the actual context of the African situation. You can be brilliant but not have opportunities, and he was one of those people who had to find opportunities. And we find very young people who are brilliant, and they get that rare chance that not many and not all of us have access to, and then they become great. But then there's also the issue of, I know a young man who developed something and it became an international thing. It's a renewal in turning a certain coconut shells into electricity, and it was a really good form of renewable energy. And he started an organization, and he started making money, came from nothing. And then I hear he has now been bought out by a very big global North company. So it's also about giving the young Africans the opportunity to be aware of their rights and to know that there's intellectual property. There's all of that capacity building when you have and harness that. But I think it just goes back to my point about promoting non-formal education and finding spaces in which we can accommodate Africans who have certain skills. Doesn't necessarily have to be a degree or diploma. It could be just enhancing skills, but creating those jobs. Unfortunately, we're already in a situation where we are losing what we have is the brain drain, where a lot of these talented youths are spotted by Microsoft on social media, and you have the African brain drain where, although we are, the next population, although, according to UNICEF, 80% of the global population is affected by the climate crisis, but 70% of the youth are, found in Africa. So we have this issue where if we don't find ways to harness that talent, it then gets bleeded, because these big companies are seeing that where the future is, the future is Africa. The future are Africans. And so you have brain drain, and then you lose out on that. So creating spaces where Africans can take a computer, and if you can make parts out of it, if you can finding a space for them to also thrive. It shouldn't always be, and it's not a reality for us to say, you need to have a PhD. It's just not a lived reality. And I would hope that going forward, that will be something that we could discuss in spaces, these kinds of spaces, and also those of us who have that opportunity in higher policy-making spaces.
Thank you very much, Shumira. I think you have highlighted the importance of contextualizing the African climate agenda, and also what the African governments pushed for at COP27. We're trying to get the special circumstances of Africa recognized, so that policies coming down from the top take into account your comments. And we're still working towards that. And I think as the youth, we should take up that mantle and keep pushing for the differentiated but differentiated responsibility. Is it common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacity? So I like your perspective on creating spaces for Africans to thrive, how these spaces can perhaps become the brain gain, and counter the brain drain, so that our people can be relevant. And in the UNFCCC, Article 6 of the UNFCCC, which is Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, is focused on what's called Action for Climate Empowerment, which speaks about education. And in these core parts of the articles, there isn't, the way they are looking at climate education, they are more or less looking at it the way you speak, to look beyond just the typical education system, but to use education as a catalyzer to empowering people, especially those who are with outside these institutions of higher learning where geography, environmental studies, and climate change is often found. I mean, even at a primary high school level, you don't really get taught properly about climate. And if you don't make it out of high school, well, it's going to be hard for you to really understand and further from that. I basically wanted to share comments by Shamiso that she wanted to be read on the question we had asked her. And the question that was asked to Shamiso was basically the point on, let me just get there. Could you highlight youth-led climate initiatives or movements that have inspired her, and also from her perspective, what are the most critical steps that African youth should take to combat climate change? And some of the thoughts she said, just to briefly run through it because we're running out of time, is that she says, and I quote, "I'm fascinated recently in the growth and evolution of oil coys. For background, this started way back in 2015, where there was what was called the International Mobilization Working Group, and the idea was to get young people from around the world to get to Koi, the one that precedes COP Pro. So in short, to explain to you, young people around the world meet a week before the main climate change conference. And that conference is called Conference of Youth. And we've had 18 successfully following each COP. This year's COI is in Dubai. And what Shamiso is saying, she's fascinated by the growth of and evolution of LCOIs, because LCOIs, where some of us were attending these younger meetings, also argued that not everyone can get funding to come to COI. So why don't we localize COI? And that's how you're seeing all these many LCOIs around the world. And Shamiso is fascinated with that. And to continue, she says, they identified a gap, particularly for Global South youth participation, and the many barriers surrounding their ability to participate at COI due to funding, logistics, and visa travels. Then she says partnerships have also grown, forming strong relations with UN country offices. We recently carried out a desk review of LCOI reports. So I think in short here, Shamiso is trying to show an innovation that was established by the youth themselves and led by the youth themselves, and how the youth can take advantage of systems. Sometimes government will give you a small room, but it's up to you how you can maybe build an attic or a basement thereafter. And I think that's basically Shamiso's perspective. And I would like then now to move on to my next part of the program. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists for your contributions. This was very, very insightful, and I thought maybe we needed and lacked time. We needed more of it. And I'd like to thank our participants for staying throughout. The climate process requires you to also be sometimes meticulous with it and just stay focused, because it's sometimes people think you can simply enter this space and an opportunity will present itself, but it's coming on calls like this, listening to the diversity of opinions, that you could reach that logic. So if I can I maybe get some reflection comments from our primary speakers, Farhana and Alice, to just briefly give some reflections on what they've heard from the young people and share with us like on what they think about it. Then thereafter, would like to hear from you, the participants, to share with us, like, because I saw a lot of engagements and there's questions also posed that we'll give back to the panelists. So maybe we start with those reflections from Farhana and Alice. I'm not sure who spoke first between Alice and Farhana, so whoever spoke first in the beginning is the one we probably give first.
Hi, Dion, can you hear me? Am I okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to give reflections, and it's been an immensely rich and hugely positive to hear all of these amazing people, as well as to look at all of the suggestions, comments, questions coming in, ideas coming in through the chat function. So I just want to say thank you to the panelists. I know that this few 60 minutes or so that they've had, 90 minutes, is just a tiny reflection of the commitment that they have for this. And I'm sad and sorry that we won't have more funding this year to fund more of the work. But, this shows to me why we need to continue fostering and supporting the links and, supporting our young people take things forward. Yeah. So over to you, Alice. Thank you. Thanks, Dion. Thanks to everyone as well for this amazing webinar, to SAT and SAYOF.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's It's been an amazing opportunity and privilege to be sitting here and listening in to the thoughts, to the ideas, to I think even some of the thoughts and ideas that really challenge youth challenging themselves, so to speak, which I think is really a great thing, because what that also says is it tells me that the approach is not necessarily to just take things as on the surface and as given, but there is an appetite to interrogate our thinking, to interrogate our understanding, to interrogate our approaches, to interrogate even some of the assumptions that we make about ourselves, about the world around us, and about the relationships that we have, especially with the policymakers and those that are in decision-making positions. And one of the key, and there are many, many takeaways that I could speak to, but because of time, the one thing that I could just flag, which I picked from the conversations, is this idea that space is political. It is not something that will be given easily and freely. And there's need, I think, to actually claim it, to demand it, and to be able to actually safeguard it when we have it, so that we also keep it political, and it works for us as young people. And listen to us as young people. So really, really inspired by the conversation, and really to thank everybody that worked very, very, very hard over the weeks to prepare for this, and to thank our partners again for this collaboration, which I think has really been a fantastic in terms of the outcomes that we are seeing here. Thank you very much, and back to you, Dion.
That is so much appreciated to both of you. I am very, very grateful having this component that brings an intergenerational presence to this webinar. And I think your reflections they show us that even when we grow older as young people, we should always stay passionate for the youth agenda, because it needs us throughout. And we would like to thank you. I would like to also, on behalf of the youth, say thank you for being committed to the youth. And particularly listening to some of the comments that were raised, it sounds like the youth agenda depends on where you are and who you're talking to, but there isn't like a golden equation or ratio that helps us get that. And we sometimes underestimate and we condemn every older person as people who do not care for the youth. But with your presence, it shows that that is not the case, and we should learn to pick out our allies and then work with them. We are not ideally far. We're not ideally closing our session now, because we're still slightly far in terms of some questions that need to be answered. And there's a question from Will Houghton, and I'm not too sure exactly who can answer this, but I will just pose it. And then anybody from the panelists, and also Farhana and Alice, if you wish to assist, because this question slightly is also talking to experience beyond just the youth itself. So Will is asking, how should renewable energy organizations in the global north be supporting youth in the global south? That's the first question. If there's any panelists who would love to help us answer that, that would be nice. Oh, a break. Okay, just to give us a quick update, there seems to be some changes in our program. Unfortunately, the climate justice a climate justice just transition team will have to jump off, as they have a Global South network reconvening in 5 minutes. And as such, perhaps we will take this moment to give them an opportunity for them to also do that. So thank you for that. Hi, Farhana. We would release everybody immediately. We'll have 2 questions, and then from there it should be fine for people to be off the call.
Sorry, thank you so much. I really do have to jump off and take a few minutes to get ready for the next call. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Farhana. All the best with your next meetings.
All right. So there's a question on the floor. for any of the panelists, if you would like to tell us a little bit more about how the organizations working on renewable energy in the global north can support youth organizations in the global south. Stephen, Shumirai, or Alice, if you would like to help our question at this point, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Hi, hi, Dion.
Hey, hello, yeah. Would you like to answer that question?
Perhaps I would comment on the question rather than give a concrete answer to it, because I don't think my answer would be completely fulfilling the answer that should be given. But what we are seeing is that if you go to events like the Mining Indaba, there is a civil society one, and there obviously is the official one with official government officials. And, you know, these issues have been raised, that these international companies, you know, we all know them, the giants that are based in the UK. What they seem to do is they seem to come into these industries, into our communities, and they extract brutally. They ruin our agriculture. They extract and then they leave. The community is ravaged. We've had situations where people's ancestral homes have been damaged, ancestral graves have been taken away. So this conversation is a very, very big conversation. It's a global conversation about how then does how then do those companies not only come in to assist youth organizations within the mining and climate change sector, but also rectify the issues and the damage that has been caused. And these have been very heated conversations. You know, it's something that is quite an area of primary focus, because just as we also want to be compensated for, as Africa, you know, for what's going on with our global emissions and being affected, there should definitely be an active plan with these mining companies to ensure that these communities are compensated for the damage that is caused. And there have been many cases in the mining sector, but in my view, there definitely should be a system of formal compensation. But obviously, you know, the compensation for these kinds of issues is usually it's still at a very complicated stage. And we really just have to, you know, just think about it, and also in the chat type ideas about how we as the youth can help in that agenda before we jump to the money coming to us, but the money actually from the mining companies fixing the ravage within our communities.
If I may just quickly add, I know time is not on our side.
No.
So if you don't mind, I think for me the question is much bigger, in the sense that I wouldn't even limit it to it being a question around getting support and help on issues of energy or issues of climate change. I think it is a broader question around the flow of resources generally, and the relationship between the global north and the global south in that regard. And thinking about it, especially from a lens of neocolonial and neoliberal nature of aid and help. So for me, the first question would be to ask who is actually setting the agenda for help and support. Who actually is deciding that there is need for help and support, and interrogate the terms of that help and support, and interrogate who decides the nature of that help, the form of that help, and who decides the kind of support that is given. And so that, I think, opens up a completely different conversation around the need to decolonize aid, to decolonize development, to decolonize support, because the very fact that we are even talking about, you know, how do we get the global north to support the global south as if it's the most natural thing to be doing? And we are not actually interrogating the question, why is it that there is part of the world that needs to be supporting another part of the world? How did we arrive here? And how do we change that and deconstruct that in a manner that allows for a completely different kind of conversation? That, for me, I think would be my response to this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I really think the next dialogue should probably dig deeper into trying to look into those philosophical ethics and principles type of conversations that often are missing from the dialogue. So I'm not too sure if Mr. Will Houghton has received those comments from our speakers, because those answers were directed to the question on how should renewable energy organizations in the North support youth organizations in the South. Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to answer. So Alice and Shumirai, he's very satisfied with that. And I think Will, please continue to keep in touch, because such questions, I think, can turn into potential empowerment for the youth. And there were other questions on how can one join the SADC Youth Parliament, but Laurel is clearly not here. I'm not sure if Roland can help answer that. Shamir experiences the Youth Global Document, which I think is Shamiso's answer on the Global Youth Statement. So to help Richard Andrew on that, the Global Youth Statement is thematic, more or less, and it's one of the biggest challenges as African youth, because you can't come to an international process and start saying, yes, and African youth need to be supported. They would definitely remind you that it's an international document and it's not only for African youth. So it becomes so much more difficult to put our comments there, but it does take into account on the thematic base, the circumstances, and then they still need to collate and aggregate that, which I think is something that's important, because we are always missing when they are aggregating those comments. And then when our presidents and leaders read these documents, they can't seem to recognize themselves in that. So Roland, if you wish, you can help answer the question on how SADC youth, one can join the SADC Youth Forum, I would like to think, because I don't think there's a SADC Youth Parliament. And then Alice and Shumirai, there was also a question on what are some of the projects we can run in rural villages to promote food security. And I think that's the only questions that are outstanding, unless anybody else can give it up. So Roland, do you want to do that, or can I just start to wrap up the call, because I think we're also almost at time. Oh yeah, there's the question. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's the question. The person said, are there any good examples of meaningful youth engagement, either at a policy level or implementation level? Show me if you can quickly wrap that. I think it would be fair to just wrap up the call thereafter. If you can just do it as fast as possible.
Hi, Dion. I think for me, the question that I can answer, because I have a mentor at the SADC Youth Parliament, is that I see yes, there is a SADC Youth Parliament. Yes, so as a mentor, it's basically a program, and it's run in coordination with SADC PF, and it's led by our partner group SAYOF. The mentors are headhunted, they're not chosen, but the participants obviously have, there's application processes. So please just make sure to follow SAYOF, SADC PF, Southern Africa Trust. And when those applications come out, we'll be able to retweet and share those opportunities, because obviously for this year, participants have already been chosen. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that answer. And for the one on any good examples of meaningful youth engagement, I think we can just share, because we are completely out of time now, but I can just share with you, maybe you can check the NDC youth engagement. They are trying to get youth in their national climate change action plans. And the Africa Youth Climate Assembly also created a declaration for African youth. We can also look into how we leverage that. And then the several COIs. But unfortunately, I have to be that guy that has to end our beautiful conversation. And I would like to basically give this opportunity to the closing remarks from the Southern Africa Trust. And I would like to just say thank you very much for attending this call. It was a pleasure to be your moderator, even though it's very difficult because you just want to add and stuff. And I'd like to ask that we continue this family conversation. We're the only region in Africa, the world, in fact, that has a youth envoy speaking to us institutions of state. So thank you very much, and I look forward. And therefore, I would like to give the closing remarks over to Southern Africa Trust. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you for a stellar job moderating this discussion. I would also like to thank Alice and Farhana in their absence for the opening remarks that really set the scene for the discussion that we had. Thank you to our brilliant panelists for their time, as well as the thought-provoking insights that you've shared. I would like to also thank the participants. Without you, we would not have this event. Thank you for your engagement. You really have enriched the conversation, and apologies for those questions that we didn't address. There'll be another time for us to reconvene. Lastly, to the team that put this webinar together, thank you so much for the hard work. A lot of information and insights have been put on the table this afternoon. But I think what's crucial for us to take away is that first, this webinar is it's a first in a series of interventions that we're having at the Trust with our partners in helping to profile and highlight youth voices and empower them in the fight against climate change. So you're going to be hearing more from us on how we can work together, as well as more engagements that we can have. I think a critical issue that has been raised is around resources and how do we ensure that the available resources are actually going to these youth platforms. Alice raised a very important point before she left. How do we decolonize and deconstruct this issue of funding? What are the different funding models that we can look at and innovate around? So this is an area that we should continue reflecting on for us to arrive together at sustainable, long-lasting funding solutions for these youth platforms. And I think critically, lastly, how do we take advantage of the upcoming COP28 that's going to be happening very soon as a global platform for dialogue? On the call, we've heard from the different speakers about the need for inclusion, agency, and voice. How can the youth in Africa be better supported to give them a seat at the table, to actually make decisions around these issues? So these are some of the key areas for us to reflect on as we leave this call. And with these few remarks, I would like to end it here and reemphasize again that this is just the start. You'll be hearing from us very soon at the Trust. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for attending, and have a lovely afternoon wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good